Good morning and welcome, Patriot Radio News Hour. Joe and Jason on this Thursday, the 6th day of April. And I'll tell you what, a lot going on. Major revisions to the jobless claims. I've never seen anything like it. And I say this because this is just another example of the credibility that is being lost here in the United States, and really not here in the United States, abroad, globally. I've said it, and I've been saying it for how long? We've got a bunch of clowns. Jay Powell is a clown. Janet Yellen is a clown. Joe Biden is a clown. And the rest of the world has taken notice. I would say in the last week, more has been done in the last week to destabilize the dollar than I've seen in the 20 plus years that I've been doing this radio show. It has been incredible. Countries that we would consider to be allies. The real big problem is countries that really are the biggest countries in the rest of the world outside of us. I mean, we're talking about China, we're talking about India, we're talking about Brazil. These countries really are the huge economy. Think about it, in this hemisphere, Brazil's the second largest economy in the world in this hemisphere, right? China's already number 2. India's number 3 in the world, right? Then you got obviously Russia and Saudi Arabia. By the way, I don't think we'll get to it all. We got so much to talk about between what's going on with jobless claims. The government just added hundreds of thousands of people, miraculously, hundreds of thousands of more people apparently have been laid off than what they've been telling us. And on top of that, a huge meeting occurred in China between the Chinese, the Russians, the Saudis, the Iranians. Oh, and by the way, Brazil was brought up to speed, if you will. We'll talk about all of those things. But how much does your portfolio weigh is going to be a very, very important question. And it's already important. But I'm just telling you right now, just wait a little bit and you're going to find out how important it is. 800-951-0592. allamericangold.com is the website. And Jason, just so you know, the headline number, 228,000 people filed for unemployment claims for the very first time. Now, we haven't had a number above 200,000 like all year, right? We've had 180s, 190s. And then this morning, the government said, well, maybe, just maybe, we were being a little overly generous with the seasonal adjustments. And they went back for the last 9 weeks. So essentially, they said, hey, we took all of March and all of February and added 50, 60,000 job losses per week to all of those numbers. But how they got it to play out better was they said, oh, by the way, last week when we did this show, I told you the government said 194,000 people filed for jobless claims. This week, what they did is they said, nah, it wasn't. It was 246,000. So that way, Jason, it made the 228,000 from today look a lot better. Right? I mean, but most people would have been like, oh my God, what? It was 30,000 more people lost their jobs all of a sudden this week. Oh, no, that didn't happen. No. Actually, we screwed up and it was less.
Sounds like they're rigging the numbers again, Joe. Tell the story they want people to hear instead of what's actually happening. why don't they just get the right numbers the first time and give them out so people can digest what's really going on? But these adjustments are always going on. They're always having to adjust them, right? These are numbers are way behind us a month or 2 months or even more, and they're readjusting them. It's just what do you believe, right? It's whatever story they want to preach to us, I guess.
Listen, I'm going to tell you right now, the countries are lining up. We'll get to all of it. We're going to play a clip from Tucker Carlson in the next segment. It's going to take most of that segment, but I want people to understand things are starting to change and change very, very, very quickly. Layoff announcements, Challenger Gray in Christmas. Layoff announcements are up 500%. Planned layoffs grew again, 90,000, up 15% from February's number. Job cuts have soared, 270,000 so far in 2023. That's up 400% from the last year. Tech sector continues to get hammered, but this is the one that really caught my eye. Small businesses filing for bankruptcy at a record pace, surpassing the COVID crash. And Jason, this is something we have told and warned people about. Inflation is a small business killer. And apparently, without COVID money, they're starting to close their doors. Patriot Radio News Hour, Joe and Jason. We're going to talk about how's the world perceiving the U.S. and the U.S. dollar. That's coming up next. 800-951-0592, Joe and Jason, Patriot Radio News Hour. This clip's going to take up most of the segment here. This is Tucker Carlson. Sometimes it's good to hear from somebody else in the view of the world about the United States and the U.S. dollar. Jack, let's play Tucker.
Years since the end of the Second World War, the U.S. dollar has effectively been the currency of the world. For our entire lifetimes, there was virtually no place on the entire globe you could go that would turn down a 20. Andrew Jackson's face beside the famous seal of the U.S. Treasury was probably America's best-known export. From Dar es Salaam to Sri Lanka to the smallest gold mining outpost in the Amazon basin, every shopkeeper on earth recognized a $20 bill. The dollar was universal, and not just universal in commerce, though the majority of international transactions were conducted in dollars, but universally held as a long-term store of value globally. The world's central banks stockpiled U.S. dollars, far more than any other currency. Now, most Americans may not have known that, or they did, but it doesn't matter whether they knew it. It was very good for everyone who lives here. Because there were so many U.S. dollars in circulation outside of the country, the cost of borrowing money inside the country remained artificially low. And that's one of the reasons that in this country, America, middle-class people could buy their own homes. The U.S. government, meanwhile, was able to run up astronomical debts without many obvious consequences. Now, from time to time, the Congress would debate something called the debt ceiling, but it was abstract. For most people, the entire topic didn't seem very relevant to their lives because for most of that time, it really wasn't. America printed the U.S. dollar, we controlled the global reserve currency, and that meant that for us, money was cheap. We had privileges that nobody else in the world had. It's been very nice, but what would happen if it ended? You don't even really want to think about that because the consequences would be too ugly, really ugly. But we started to worry about it about a year ago, really the day the Russian military rolled over the Ukrainian border. Now, by itself, that was a destabilizing event. War always is destabilizing and always challenges the existing order. But it was the West's reaction to the Russian invasion that seemed ominous. Policymakers in the U.S. went insane. Joe Biden, helped by his Republican allies in the Senate, appeared to be determined not simply to topple the Russian government in some kind of regime change war, but to blow up the post-war economic order that had served the U.S. so generously for so long. So we thought at the time that the real threat to our future wasn't just the billions we were sending to Zelensky. That was reckless, but probably not going to end America. The real threat was the unprecedented economic sanctions that Joe Biden was allowed to, in fact, encouraged to impose. Those sanctions, you'll recall, were supposed to hurt Russia. But even in March of last year, it seemed obvious they were going to hurt the United States much more than they hurt Russia. Here's what we said 13 months ago. We should prepare to lose our position as holder of the world's reserve currency. That is happening in slow motion. It's unmistakable. Now, the Biden people seem to have no idea this is going on, or maybe they want it to happen. Joe Biden was up there at the State of the Union bragging about how he took 30 points off the Russian ruble in a single day. Hooray, good for us! But once we stop celebrating our win, the destruction of the Russian economy, they deserve it. You got to wonder, is there a downside to this? Could it be a Pyrrhic victory? Let's see. These policies have driven Russia, China, India, Turkey, and other countries to accelerate their flight from the U.S. dollar. Now, to be clear, that's the majority of the global economy. This may be the most reckless and destructive thing any American president has ever done to the United States. So that was last year, and at the time it was really just yelling into the wind. Those views were considered absurd, even treasonous. Biden and his Republican allies described sanctions against Russia as morally essential. So we seized oligarchs' yachts at anchor. We closed the Apple store in Moscow. We were all assured these were important victories, and anyone who asked questions about their long-term economic consequences was a Putin stooge. That was the consensus in Washington last spring, in case you've forgotten what it sounded like.
The purpose of the sanctions has always been and continues to be deterrence. But let's also recognize the unique nature of the sanctions that we have outlined. These are some of the greatest sanctions, if not the strongest, that we've ever issued.
The president believes that sanctions are intended to deter.
As to the sanctions, the most important thing we can do is to use them as a deterrent, as a means of dissuading Russia from engaging in further aggression.
We are right now enforcing powerful economic sanctions. We're cutting off Russia's largest banks in the international financial system, preventing Russia's central bank from defending the Russian ruble, making Putin's $630 billion war fund worthless.
These people are such buffoons, and all the Republican senators nodding in agreement. You watch that and you wonder if they really believe what they were telling you. If they really did believe that, they're stupider than they look. These sanctions were never going to work in the way they promised because, unlike the United States, Russia does not have a late-stage finance economy. Russian oligarchs do not get rich from credit default swaps. They get rich from selling actual things that people need in order to live. Oil, natural gas, iron, fertilizer, coal, wheat. By some measures, Russia has the largest resource economy in the world. Oh, okay. So they could barter if they needed to. So a year later, despite the sanctions you were told are the greatest ever devised, the Russian ruble is just as strong against the U.S. dollar as it was before the war in Ukraine. So we didn't really hurt Russia with those sanctions, certainly not long term. Who'd we hurt? Ourselves. E.J. Antoni and Peter St. Onge wrote an incisive piece in the Daily Caller last week that explains part of why this happened. Quote, a critical feature of a reserve currency is its apolitical nature, which Biden is now gutting. After both parties in Washington destroyed the dollar's stability with inflation, now the Biden administration has chosen to wield the dollar as a weapon. Together, these two factors send a message to foreigners, which is they should get out while they still can. In response to Russia's war with Ukraine, the U.S. froze the dollar reserves of Russia's central bank. To be clear, these were not American assets. These were dollars owned by the Russian central bank and the Russian people. The seizure was intended to cause bank runs and collapse Russia's credit system. It didn't work. Instead, it exposed the Biden administration's willingness to violate the trillions of dollars that foreigners rightfully own. The danger of this precedent is difficult to overstate, end quote. Now, all of us saw that happening, but you couldn't say anything because Russia, bad. We can't even watch their hockey teams. All right. But what do you think happened next as we were jumping up and down and talking about Winston Churchill? Well, smart foreigners, and there are some, believe it or not, started to dump the U.S. dollar. Why? Because the U.S. dollar was no longer a reliable store of value. Suddenly, it was a political weapon that could be wielded at will against anyone who held it. So what if you had a border dispute with one of your neighbors that the State Department hadn't authorized? Or what if you accidentally criticized transgender theology and irritated the Human Rights Campaign? Well, the U.S. government might denounce you as immoral and then confiscate all your money. Because they just did that with Russia. And as a result, dollars began to look much less appealing to the rest of the world. And so de-dollarization began. And it has accelerated at remarkable speed, almost without comment in the American media, over the last year. So Russia announced it will conduct business in Asia, Africa, and Latin America in Chinese currency. Brazil, which has a brand new government supported by the Biden administration, announced it will do the same thing. Brazil, largest economy in the hemisphere after ours. Pakistan is doing the same thing. That's a longtime U.S. ally. India and Malaysia, two of the biggest economies in the world, announced they'll be settling their trade in their own currencies, not the dollar. Even France, which we liberated, is using Chinese currency in a new liquefied natural gas trade. China and Saudi Arabia are now major business partners. And again, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is happening around the world, and all of it is shutting out the U.S. dollar. And it's happening a lot faster than anybody could have predicted.
Jack, stop it right there. We're getting the gist of that. By the way, Malaysia now has joined in with this, saying that Malaysia no longer believes it is necessary to depend on the U.S. dollar. Their prime minister said during an address to the nation and the nation's parliament, they are now saying that they will start using the Chinese renminbi on most of their major trades. Jason, the list keeps going. And again, we've used the dollar as a weapon. We've used the SWIFT system as a weapon. A couple of things. Hey, Joe Biden this, Joe Biden that. Democrat, Republican, all the same. Don't you agree? Listen, we've been doing this for a long time. We've been the bully on the block for a long time. We had no business in Russia, in Ukraine. Believe me, if most Americans knew the real truth, they would probably side with the Russians. I hate to say it, but Jason, that's the reality.
Right, and you can blame them whatever president you want, but presidents don't make these decisions. Biden didn't think this master plan up himself and sanction countries. He signed off on what was done for him. He's just a figurehead, and the policy was made. Joe, who made the policy? Well, I think the moneyed masters of this country made the policy of these sanctions. The Federal Reserve wants these sanctions to happen. They used it as a weapon, the dollar. And Joe, we don't really know. When you're playing these games against the big club who make all the decisions, we don't know what they want. Do they want the dollar to go down? Do they want to move into foreign markets? Because they are in league with all the other central banks of all these other so-called enemy countries. They all work together. The Chinese central bank and the Fed work together. People want to think differently. These are businessmen. These are business markets.
Again, let me explain it more simply. You know why they wanted the U.S. dollar? Because they knew way ahead of time, hey, these are going to be the bad boys of the world. This is going to be the largest economy in the world. Guess what they know now? China is going to be the largest economy in the world. By the way, India is going to be the second largest economy in the world. And with that goes the spoils. And essentially for everybody out there that's hearing my voice, just understand, what does it mean? Because I said, listen, the dollar's not going to go away. It's not. But it is going to be used significantly less. And what does that mean? Because most people don't understand what that means. And what that means is very simply, your standard of living, our standard of living, is going to be lowered significantly. Why? Because, listen, the part of the great thing of being the reserve currency and everyone holding your debt is you got to live beyond your means. Right? How did we get $40 trillion worth of debt. Well, we convinced the rest of the world that they had to have dollars. But then, and really, as things got further and further out of control, we started using it as a weapon. Think about it this way. These countries view the dollar like a bank, and they're worried about their deposits now. Not only are they worried about the dollar and the debt and what's happening, but they saw the banking crisis, and they were like, hey, wait a minute. You said that you fixed the problem. This is a bank. You know what? None of us have ever heard of this bank. It doesn't even have $200 billion of assets. How is this going to destroy the financial system? You know who's really pissed? We haven't even talked about it. The European banks are mad as hell right now. They've had more money leave their banks in the last month, and all because of what, some bank that nobody had ever heard of? Yeah. You better smarten up when we get back. What were Saudi and Iran doing in Beijing? I'm going to tell you about that next.